Hello and welcome back to another Mahner Farms video. Today we're going to be doing a tour of our old barn here. So, a little out of breath. I just climbed up the elevator to get up where I am. Look at that view. You can see our junkyard, see some silos, you can see back into the beautiful pasture land. Not a bad view overall, but I don't love being up here if I'm being honest. So we're just going to get going. I'm only up here because I have a little chore to do, but I figured since I wanted to make this video, this would be a cool place to start it. As you can see, our barn is pretty squiggly wiggly. It's actually really hard. The camera doesn't do it justice, but it's not exactly straight. You can see just the spine of the barn itself curves a bunch. And I don't know if you can see it, but the roof itself also has a lot of bumps in it. But I'm up here just fixing some wind damage on some of the shingles after we had done the dormers. You can actually see the dormers up here. They look pretty good. And you can see our new roofing that we put out on too. So this barn was built in two halves. First half, I believe, in 68. The second half, I believe, in 69. So not an incredibly old barn. You can see our silage pit. We used that up until the late 90s. Here's our heifer barn. That's the newest thing on this farm. We built that in 2004, I think. So most of this stuff is pretty old. Ooh, okay, we're down on the ground again where I feel much more comfortable. So basically, this barn has always been in my family. Now the land hasn't. We've been on this land or adjacent land since the 1870s, but this isn't the original farmstead for my family. The original Mahner Farms would have been up the hill. This is the barn that was built in the late 60s when my grandfather started farming, I guess. What happened there was him and his dad had gotten into a fight about something. I don't know. It was long before I was alive. And at the end of it, and it all stemmed around the fact that Grandpa Pa was working on the farm, but he wasn't getting anything out of it because he was just working on the family farm and he was an adult at this point. So basically what happened was he ended up getting half the cows. And so he had half these cows now and he needed to quickly build a barn. So he goes down to the bank, gets a loan to build the first half of this barn so he can fit the cows in there. And then the next year has another loan to build the second half. And so that's why we have two halves of the same barn built within a year of each other, and why we now have a lot of problems because the first half of the barn was built with significantly better materials for the most part than the second half. And so there's just all sorts of reasons why it would have been much better if the barn was all built at once and designed at once and thought through a little bit better. But without talking too much more about it, let's just get into touring it. Here in the approach, we have these two front rooms. This one here where you see these two doors right in front of me, and this room here is, this whole half of it is the pump room. That's where the pump for our milk line goes. And we also obviously store a lot of stuff in there. That whole half of it is just an alcove. We used to park the 62 in there for the winter, so we had it for when we needed to spread shit. So this room has been there as long as I can remember. I'm sure it was built, I don't know, relatively recently in the barn's history, but I don't know. It's been there as long as I've been alive. This room here is what we call the compressor room. It's basically just a tool room. Through that door is where they'd run the milk hose to get to our milk room, and we'll get there. But we call it the compressor room. Me and my dad put that up in, I don't know, the early 2000s, 2001, 2002, somewhere in there. I'm not sure exactly, but that's when we put that up. So that happened in my lifetime. Come around to the north side of the barn and we have one of the biggest issues that I think most people would recognize right away with this barn is that we live in Wisconsin and our north facing wall is where the barn cleaner comes out. You don't want to do that. All that cold air constantly blowing on it just freezes everything solid constantly. So it's always been a pain in the ass having this come out of the north end of the barn. That's something Pa designed. So I'd have done it differently. I probably would have reversed the entire layout of this barn, but that is always something we've had. And we can go in through that door, or we could go in through the door that I showed you up in front. I'm just going to go through this one since I'm already standing here. So right down here, this is where we'd run the barn cleaner. Comes out through these two holes in the ground. This used to all be different. So basically we stopped milking cows in 2005. That's when we sold the cows and moved. And so we didn't live on the farm after that. And so the last time we milked cows in here was 2005. That being said, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, my cousin and her husband, they wanted to start farming and they obviously needed a place to do that. So we let them kind of rent this barn. They basically just milked here for free, but it was kind of where they started building up their herd. So it has, some cows have been milked in here more recently than 2005, but it's been that long since we milked cows in here. So you can see it looks a little old and unused. This whole section back here is still pretty tore up from when they were here. The barn cleaner didn't used to come straight out here. It used to come around this curve and go back out through that door there. So currently the way that they jerry-rigged it, it comes out underneath the door. Not the most ideal design. Obviously, I like the design better without that reverse curve. because we used to have problems with that relatively frequently. So I understand not wanting to have that, but obviously just having it run in the dirt underneath the door is not a good alternative. So this used to be where we kept small stock. So this section here used to just have a small little wood pen in it where the smallest calves would stay, the bottle fed ones. And then over there was just the slightly bigger calf section. It wasn't a very large holding area, but we're talking about a 50 cow dairy operation here. So it's not like we had hundreds of calves. Over this way, used to have the breeder box up here. Now it's over there. I arguably think it's better over there because here it used to be right in the way, and if it was open, you couldn't walk through here, so it was a pain in the ass. Our old rotary phone still works. Through here, we can go into the milk house. You can see once again, all indicative of a very small dairy operation, or I should say, I have exact amounts here, a 50 cow dairy operation. There's our bulk tank, not very big. Still got some units here. I think there's 4 there, but I only see 3 that are complete, so I'm guessing the other ones are just missing parts. But for 4 units, which I believe is what we used to milk with when we still milked here. Water heater, all fairly standard. I spent a lot of time in here, so every time I walk in here, I always have memories from, obviously, my childhood. I know that pretty much everything still works because, like I said, just a couple years ago, it was all running. Fun thing about this barn is that we have very narrow mangers. It's not actually fun, but basically what happened with that was the barn design is a standard width, but a lot of the barns built back in the 60s and 70s had really narrow walkways. And so Pa didn't want that, and so he made the walkway wider, which I think is a good choice. I never liked those narrow walkway barns. Always hated working in them. It was just much more of a pain, and cows can piss you off in a lot of ways. And the narrower the walkway, the more that happens. So I agree with the wider walkway, but what that would mean for me is the barn needs to be wider. The overall footprint of the barn would need to be wider. So that wasn't what he did. So basically we just sacrificed manger space, because you can see our walkway is quite a bit wider than the standard for this time. The stalls themselves are standard. They're not bad. I actually really like them because a lot of stalls built in dairy barns, they made the stalls so much bigger. The problem with that is it's harder to keep your cows clean because then they're constantly shitting under where they sleep instead of in the gutter. So these are about perfect width stalls, so I've got no complaints there. Our mangers is where we have the complaints because they may look plenty wide, but they're really actually pretty narrow, especially if you want to do anything more modern than a wheelbarrow. We fed with a wheelbarrow, which I don't have to tell you if you've ever done it before, is an awful lot of work, and it makes it very, very slow. Normally feeding 50 cows, like in a modern sense where you're doing like a TMR mix and running it out, that would take very little time. But in this barn, because you had to do it with wheelbarrows, it took a very long time. So you can see that's kind of the main feeding issue with this. We've got one of our up ladders here, but we're on the side of the barn that I don't like going in haymow because of this little thing here. That may look like a chute, and you may notice a table underneath it. What happened there is we were cleaning out the haymow about a year ago, and I fell through that hole because this side of the barn, the haymow floor is fairly rotten, and I'll talk about that when we get up into the haymow. Going down the center, you can see we have a split here in the middle, which is where the cows will come in through the west door. Like most dairy operations at the time during the summertime, well, basically springtime through fall, the cows would be let out every day. Well, or every night, depending how you did it. But we did it after milking them in the morning. We'd let them out, then we'd bring them in at night and keep them in, and then, you know, rinse and repeat. There's our silage pit, like I said. Looks very old, but the funny thing about that is it was still used in my lifetime. We were still coming in here, kept corn silage in here, and we'd come in here with wheelbarrows and shovel it into wheelbarrows and bring it into the barn. Not joking, in my lifetime, we did that. So always fun there. I personally would like to tear it down and get it out of the way because it's not of any use, it's just in the way. So you can see right here, or I assume you can see right there on the floor, you can see kind of a crack where there's a different level. You can kind of see it on the walk, but not nearly as much. You can see it on that wall where you see those blocks suddenly become visible. This is the middle point of the barn. I guess we could go over here and you can see basically where the door is. See this big gap here? So one of the big things in materials is we had good concrete blocks for this first half. I say we, I wasn't alive when this was built. This half was built with much shittier cinder blocks, You can see that they're so weak that the mortar is actually stronger than them. We have had problems with that on this entire half of the barn. This spot right here by the west door is a pretty bad spot, but you can see all along this wall, oh, that pigeon scared me. All along this wall, it's pretty well deteriorated out underneath the windows in particular. Behind the ladder here where our feet were constantly kicking going up the ladder. But again, under each window. Then when we get to the corners, it gets particularly bad. So you can see this corner here. We have some insulation here for a water line going out to the heifer shed. But that corner there is pretty well deteriorated. The curb is split all along there. But this corner here is the worst one in the barn. And it's the worst for two reasons. One, again, we have those cheap cinder blocks here. But two, for some reason, they decided to run the auger for the grain bin directly through the wall, which, you know, provided a great access point for moisture and frost heave. So again, another incredibly stupid idea to do it like that. And here's an easy alternative. We have a haymow above us. So you see that switch right there? Do you see anything jamming through the wall here? We put this one up into the haymow and then through the floor. Because, you know, it makes a million times more sense, I suppose, would be the way to say that. But yeah, and you'll notice that the wall here isn't entirely deteriorated. But here it is. We have our quaint little feed room, an indoor chicken coop, which I've never been nuts about if I was ever to start farming. Not that I'm going to dairy farm in this barn because the economy just isn't there for that. But if I was going to, that thing would be first to go, and this feed room would just need a ton of work. You can see we don't have a ton of usable space. Back before we got that second grain bin put in, we kept our protein in there. All of our protein and minerals were just stored here in sacks, and we did all that by hand. Over here, you can see we just got piles of junk. And we have our two silos. This one's the newer silo. That one's the older silo. We used to keep haylage in this one and corn silage in this one. I do not know when this silo went up. It was probably during my lifetime, but I was probably too young to remember. But then again, it could have been before I was born. I don't know. It was up as long as I can remember. I watched this one go up, our corn silage silo, which you may be able to hear is absolutely loaded with starlings and pigeons. So at some point, I'm going to need to go and close all these doors and take care of that before it's just a giant pile of bird shit in there. But I remember when this silo went up, I watched it go up. And obviously, I already said I remember using the corn silage pit, so we wouldn't have used that if we didn't have the silo. So that should all be common sense. These are both either 18, I think they're 18 by 60s, but they might be 20 by 60s. Pretty sure it's 18. I'm not going to stick my head in there because I'll get pooped on. But that's the feed room, as quaint as that is. Our fencer for the main pasture. We have a 30-acre pasture outside of this barn here. That's our main pasture. There's our fencer for it. Through the door here, you can see our heifer barn. Like I said, that's the newest thing on this property. I don't know if it's appropriate to show it in a video called This Old Barn, because this isn't actually that old. But we were one of the first people in the area to put up a three-sided... Oh, yuck. That was deep. Stepped right in there. To put up a three-sided barn like this with all the sorting stalls and everything. They got pretty popular right there in the next couple of years, but we were one of the first people to put one up. Even had an outdoor manger and everything for them with ceramic tiles and stuff. It was pretty slick. We only had it for a year or two before we moved though, so, you know, one of those things that always feels like bad timing. But anyway, let's go check out the haymow. Like I said, we have two ladders going up onto the haymow. They're ladders in the loosest sense of the word. Like I said, that one down there is much harder to climb up than this one, so I'm just going to go up this one. But I'm not going to record it because I don't know how I would hold my phone and do that at the same time. But here is the haymow, and I won't spend too much time up here because it is hot as the dickens. You may be able to tell from these sidewalls that not a lot of airflow happens through here. So let me just tell you, piling hay in here in the summer was the worst job. I've piled hay in a lot of haymows. This one is by far the worst because it was always so hot in here. But you can see, again, you may be able to notice, this is a fairly large haymow. I don't know. I've heard various numbers thrown around. We used to pack it all the way to the ceiling. I've heard 30,000 plus bales in here, so take that as you may. But I know it holds quite a few. Over here, we actually have something interesting. It's probably the next thing we're going to be working on. I don't know how well you'll be able to see it here on the camera. But those gaps right there should not be there. What's happening is the barn is kind of settling and squishing outwards. So we're going to need to get some plates, some cables, and some bucklers. And we're going to be, this section I'm standing in right now, about 12 of these rafters we're going to have to crank in towards each other to prevent the barn from shitting out. because like I said, you can see right here is the spot where it's the most visible. There's that great big spot there where you can see that we're just shitting outwards. We're 3 inches further than we should be, which doesn't sound like a lot, but the construction of these old round truss barns was all of the structural integrity is on the outside of the barn. So these things you see standing in the middle, they're just wind braces. They're not actually beams or anything. So this entire barn strength, all of it, which is a lot, comes entirely from these outside walls, which sit on top of concrete walls. So if any part of that fails, the whole thing collapses. So we cannot afford that. So we're going to be, one of our next projects here, hopefully sometime this summer, is going to be trying to jack in this barn. And we might do more than this section, but we're at least going to start with this section here. Other than that, just another fun note about this barn. You can see we're at the halfway point again. This part I'm standing on is all treated Douglas fir. It's very strong, never has any sort of a problems. I could walk on it all day. We haven't gotten all the hay cleaned out from the last people that were storing hay in here. We've got most of it cleaned out, got this whole section cleaned out, but that's when I fell through that floor, was when we were doing that. This section we still need some work on, but now that we're done with the dormers, we might do that at any point. We still need to put some new doors on both the south window and the north window up there. Once we've done that, we won't have as much of a pigeon infestation problem in here, so that'll be good. But anyway, like I said, treated Douglas fir for this side. This side, however, was rough cut hemlock. And that's not normally bad. Hemlock's a nice strong wood. I mean, as long as you make sure it's not rotten and it's not wet when you install it, it should be fine. Hemlock makes a nice sturdy wood. The problem is, like quite a few people back in the day, Pa got the genius idea in his head to put a bunch of tar paper on top of it. I guess the idea being twofold, probably to prevent debris from falling down into the dairy barn, helping with inspections and stuff. And the second one, and probably the one he was thinking of, was keeping the moisture from the hay out of the floor. Problem though is this is a dairy barn, and so there's a lot of moisture down in a dairy barn, especially in Wisconsin. And so all that the tar paper did was make a nice moisture barrier on top of the wood. So all the moisture from the barn, including the milk house, which is that corner over there, I'd walk over there and show you, but like I said, this floor is sketch to walk on, and I'm not exactly light. But what all that resulted is, all of that moisture got trapped right in these boards. And it wasn't until just this year that I finally got all of the tar paper off. We used to, because this side of the barn was where we kept the feed hay, this side of the barn is where we kept the bedding. And so we emptied out the bedding every year. We did not empty out the feed hay every year, especially once we had 2 silos up. Then we used a lot less hay, so there was many years where this would be half full at its lowest. Every time we'd get to a spot, we'd pull the tar paper off, but you know, it didn't happen until we actually got it all the way empty, which didn't happen until just this year. Basically, one project we'll have to do here, and I've already figured out how I'm gonna do it, is I'm gonna go through and tear off every single square foot of this, a little at a time, of course, and replace it all with treated inch plywood. That should be more than strong enough. It'll be about 10 times as much strength in pretty much every way than these boards, just because plywood has a lot more strength than plain planks, at least for thickness. It'll also be a nice solid barrier. So if I was ever going to try doing any sort of dairy farming in here, which again, very unlikely, but still hypothetically possible, it would be good for keeping all of the debris up here instead of down in the barn. So that is the haymow. Some people might call it the worst spot of any barn. I like this haymow. I've always thought it was very cool and well made and everything. So I don't have a whole lot against it other than the fact that I hate piling hay in it. And as you can see, other than the part that I already showed you that's shitting out, it looks great. It's in great condition. It doesn't look bad at all. There's no spots that are leaking, especially now that we fixed these dormers. You can see from the inside, if you've watched the dormer project on the channel, we've done, that one in the middle was a really crooked dormer, so there's actually a decent gap. It's not big enough for birds to get through, or at least big birds, maybe barn swallows, but I don't care about them. But it's, you know, big enough for light to get through. But the other two fit pretty nice and snug. I guess one more thing to talk about here. You see this is the chute where we used to drop down bedding, you know, to bed down the cows when we did. And this spot right here is actually where I broke my neck. I was 6 years old, we were milking cows, Pa was standing right there, my dad was standing right there. We were getting chores done as quick as possible so we could get the barn clean, because we were getting, the whitewashers were coming to whitewash the barn. And I was standing right here. And a hay bale thrown by my sister came straight down that chute, all the way from the top. And in a wild fluke of events, didn't hit any of the sides and bounce and make noise and any of that on the way down. and it fell straight down, hit me on the head, and broke my neck. Fractured my C4 and C5 vertebrae, I believe, and I had compression fractures in 2 other ones. So I didn't die or get paralyzed, so that was pretty cool, I guess. But if I could take the whole thing, I would just not break my neck. But yeah, I've done a lot in this barn and have a lot of memories in here. Most of them bad, but that's life on a small Wisconsin dairy farm. This pipeline, I almost forgot a little bit of history here. This pipeline we have in here was, at least the milk part of it, was not in until, I believe, 96. So this barn was still using a, I believe it was called a step saver milking system. So basically just a tank that you'd take from cow to cow and hook it up to your air line and then hook into the tank, fill up the tank, and then bring that and dump it in the bulk tank up until 96. And like I said, we didn't get silos until the late 90s, early 2000s. So primitive farming, considering we're not Amish or something. This farm was just did not adopt new technology quickly, which explains why it is currently dead. That's the way most of the small dairy farms in Wisconsin died, is one thing or another. Either they ended up going non-generational, so kids hated growing up on the farm so much that none of them wanted to farm, so that when it came time for the parents to retire, there was no kid that wanted to do it, and then they die like that. Or you get a farm like this, that of course died through the family leaving and, you know, all that sort of stuff. You got farms that get lost to divorce. Most of the farms, though, just got lost to obscurity. People never wanted to upgrade. They didn't want to put money into upgrading any of your equipment to make it so 1 or 2 people could run it. They always figured, oh, I'll have a dozen kids and they'll just do it all. And that didn't work. And now the Wisconsin dairy farm used to be like a quarter of the population of Wisconsin, at least, was dairy farming. Now pretty much nobody is. But yeah, that's this old barn.